Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to my overview of the Precinct. I will just say real quick, yes, this is a return to my longer form format where it's essentially a review in everything but name. I score it, I play through a lot of it, usually clock a game. It just depends on how long the game is. We can talk more about this at the end of the video. I don't want to muddy up the front, but know that I love the Precinct. I've clocked it. It took me around about 11 hours, but there's still stuff to do after the credits roll, and I'm scoring it at 99%. Again, we've talked about my unconventional system that I'm pioneering, I guess, but know that no percentage point is shared, and it changes dynamically. So you might be watching this 6 months down the track, it might not be 99% anymore. But at the time of this recording, it's the second best game that I've covered this year, right after Atomfall. So yes, I highly recommend this. This game absolutely slaps. Right, so into the video we go. What is the Precinct? Precinct is a police-centric game, unlike anything that really comes to mind. Like, it's, in a way, it's a soft RP simulator. Like, it's still quite arcadey. In many ways, it reminds me of the old Xbox Live arcade trend when, you know, I really did fall in love with indie games. And you can see it from all the footage, right? There's this top-down action thing going on. But yeah, so a soft light simulation where you do police shifts, and it's all under that very heavy, dripping aesthetic of 80s Hollywood police action set pieces, right? So think about all the police chases out of the Blues Brothers, right? And maybe the chirpiness between the partners in Lethal Weapon, things like the soundtrack from Beverly Hills Cop. Basically, they've just taken all the bits, all the nostalgia that you grew up watching if you're in my age bracket, and they've jammed it all together into this absolute love letter video game that is just perfect from top to bottom. Like bug-wise issues, like occasionally you had some things clipping out on walls, and it gets into the realm of a simulation that's popping off at all times. So it kind of reminds me of, you know, your Bethesda jank at times. Just systems colliding with systems that you get weird shit happening and NPCs popping off, right? But like, again, it depends. I would say, on the Bethesda topic, newer Bethesda games are more broken than charming simulation jank, whereas the older ones, you know, circa Oblivion, and geez, we're gonna have to bloody review the Oblivion remaster, I suppose. I have things to catch up on because I've retired this. Anyway, stay on topic, Scarlet. But yeah, know that this is sort of a crime-fighting sandbox that's simulated to an extent at all times. And it's really fun and it's chaotic. And as much as the aesthetics and all that stuff that I just covered, you know, thematically what it throws back to, what it actually feels like in practice, and this might be a bizarre comparison, but it might excite some people. This reminds me of GTA 1, the old top-down, loosely resembling current GTA type game. And in that, look, let's just pull on that thread, right? What they share in common is what I would probably call a micro city. I don't know, there's no term for it, right? But these days, it's very popular. I mentioned Bethesda, but even Rockstar and all that sort of stuff. When you're doing your open worlds, bigger seems to be better. 16 times the size, right? And I'm not the only person that laments that focus. And then you see things like Outer Wilds, an excellent game, very different, but the reason for the example is because that is a much smaller scale, curated, handcrafted. Like, there's no procedural or anything like that. There's no big open empty starfield parts of the world. It's supposed to be empty, it's space. Well, no, I'm not supposed to be bored. I gave you money for a game, right? So I know I'm throwing all these touchstones out there, but this is to sort of try and get you to zero in on what's important on this game. And what's interesting about it is that it leans closer in the direction of an Outer Wilds, a smaller scale curated experience than a giant empty starfield, so they can say on the box that it's X galactic miles across or whatever the bloody metric would be. And that's why it reminds me of GTA 1, because at the time, like, GTA 1 was probably outrageously big, but retroactively, it is kind of smaller by current standards. So that's what's going on here. You're in this city called Averno. It's set in 1983, but it is very much that kind of, or how do I say this without upsetting Americans? That dilapidated, rainy New York City cop beat setting, right? Think things like the movie Seven. Everything's raining all the time, or if it's not raining, there's puddles everywhere because it was just raining. But then you've got the white and blue cop cars of the 80s, sirens blaring, that sort of stuff. So it's just absolutely dripping with theme. The soundtrack is straight out of something like Lethal Weapon or Beverly Hills Cop. You know, it's all like, you know, electric guitar riffs and saxophone with a kind of vaporwave, lower retro synth wave. You know, that kind of modern reimagining of how we remember the 80s that you see in a lot of the music now. So the whole aesthetic ties it all together perfectly. It's beautiful. But yes, it is a kind of micro simulation. It's a smaller world, 2 islands joined by bridges, and you start to memorize it because of its smaller scale. Like, there are different neighborhoods and they've all got cool throwback names like Boudica Drive or something like that, Boudica Place. And every time I hear them call that on the police dispatch, I smile. Can you fly, Bobby? But speaking of RoboCop, that's how this feels at times as well. I should have led with that. This feels like, not that you're RoboCop, but that you're one of the poor prick cops that's going to go out and get shot on patrol. Because the nature of how this simulation works is, yes, it's a smaller city, and it's not like you eat food and go to sleep and pay bills. All you do is clock in, you do your 9 to 5 shift. So it's crime. You'll do a 6-hour shift and you'll probably arrest 20 people and kill 5 of them in gunfights. It's just non-stop popping off. Again, 80s kind of post-apocalyptica in police, in crime-ridden Detroit-style RoboCop stuff. So you'll be barely done reading someone their rights, and in a bloody drug bust gone wrong, literally across the road will pop off and you'll be running across there. So yes, it's frantic. You can hear my grin, right? It is just constantly popping off all the time, and the chaos ensues. Not to an absurdist degree, but there's always some crime. You are on call non-stop, fighting something. And it's fucking excellent. There is a story tying this all together, and I'll get into the more details of the gameplay loop, but I kind of want to set the table for you. I wanted you to get the mouthfeel of what's going on here. But you're playing this young bloke, Cordell. He's an up-and-coming rookie straight out of the academy. However, he's kind of not silver-spooned, but like his dad is the ex-police chief who was gunned down mysteriously, and there's a thread there in the background. However, the narrative doesn't really play off. You could argue that the pacing's weak. It's okay, I don't mind it, but if I were to put it to you like this, you're introduced. The intrigue is dangled, not as a huge motivation, but as anyone that knows anything about storytelling, you're like, okay, right, this is going to come up again. Then you pretty much play the game as the core of the bathtub curve. And then there's a sort of final act where it pops off as a movie finale and you resolve it all. So it's not like they interject with story progression throughout the course of it. There are little cutscenes and that as you take down crime lords and gangs, but as far as the main story, it's kind of like Act 1, slight intro, Act 2 is 90% of the game, just playing the game, and then Act 3 is your last 10% resolution of the story, just to put a bow on it. So yeah, unconventional. I reckon probably by convention, the pacing's not right. But at the same time, I'm not against it. Who says video game structure has to follow Hollywood structure? So I'm all right with this light story at the front, bookend at the end, and then just 90% gameplay that has nothing to do with the story. It actually works for me, but I think under convention, again, it might jar some. So yeah, you young bloody officer cadet, or not a cadet, I guess you're straight out, but Cordell, you are paired up with Sergeant Kelly, the old dog, the heart of gold with the bung hip of the, he's just a week away from retirement, that sort of archetype. You've got a cast of very background characters, the chief of police, your captain that directs you, and the other sort of paired off police as well. But you don't have a lot to do with them. At the end of each shift, there's a scoreboard of how you did, and it will pit you against them, and I think there's an achievement for coming top, and you can call them out, but not by name, to, haul away criminals, or presumably they're the ones in backup cars when you call them in as well. But it's pretty surface level, but it's enough. It's enough to make it feel lived in and like you have colleagues, and in the few little cutscenes, they'll rib each other and laugh at each other and poke fun. It's all fairly, G-rated. So the actual loop plays out once you're in full swing and you're through tutorials and all that sort of stuff. You start a brand new shift and you'll get a bunch of options to choose from, be like 4 different daily patrols, right? And they vary, and it's not just 4, there's more than that, so it sort of shuffles them up. But you'll have ones like a foot patrol, you'll have ticket patrolling, so that's specific to tickets. You'll have just like a vehicle patrol, so go around, checking plates, that sort of stuff. Another major one is helicopter. You can actually get in the helo and offer support. And as you level up, they will unlock more, community incentives, like anti-vandalism act gets passed, or drug crackdown. And so those themed patrols will start to pop up instead. So you can go on a vandalism specific route. And the way it will work is that you'll be locked to a little miniature neighborhood. And once you've done X tickets, I don't know, maybe you've done 5 parking tickets in that neighborhood, it'll unlock the next small chunk. So even though the city is quite small in the scheme of open worlds, when you do your shift, you're generally locked into a smaller sub area, like a suburb or a combination of a couple. And the game explicitly says this is so as a cop that you get to learn your beat and become familiar with the city, but in practice, that's exactly what it does. So it's really clever, and it makes you become more attached. Like, you might know some of the suburb names or areas from GTA 5 or something, for example, but because this will lock you into one suburb for a shift, you actually start to learn it a bit more intimately. It's very clever. And again, it turns the city into a character. You can also make a custom shift, which I did like a monster one. I made like a 24-hour shift and pretty much the whole city or what have you. But it's cool, you just change up the variety and move it all around. So you'll pick your shift. Callie will bloody say something like, let's go earn another $1 or whatever. You go out the front of the police station, you'll jump in your car and you'll drive over to the suburb. You'll have a little clock counting your timer. You essentially roll up and you patrol. You hit the beat. You won't be patrolling more than 10 seconds before something will go wrong, right? Either you will actually come across things going on. Someone might litter in front of you, or you'll see civilians come screaming out of a back alley because there's people shooting each other, and you'll go and investigate. You'll see vehicles parked incorrectly or on the sidewalk or what have you. And all of this is covered at tutorial level, so you should know the infractions. You should anyway from living in the bloody civilized world, but you'll get an idea. But if something doesn't come across you on your beat, you'll get a call out to like the other side of your suburb and you can respond to that. And so look, it varies. There's a whole gamut of stuff, but that's the core of the game, is essentially working a beat, responding, handling the responses and the crimes as they come, and then you do that for pretty much 90% of the game. If you don't love that loop, you might find it tedious, and there's a sort of administrative part of arrests where you systematically go through their pockets, you check their ID, you do breathalyzers, things like that. So I suppose it could get repetitive, but I enjoyed it. There was a kind of almost catharsis to the whole method. But like, yeah, I'll just give you an example. So let's say, I mentioned vandalism. Let's say you find a dude spray painting on the wall, right? And you'll come across him. So you've got a voice line hail thing. So you can say, hey, stop, you're under arrest, citizen, that sort of crap. And it all depends. Again, the simulation for what it's covering has enough variance in it that it's very interesting. So like the dude might just stop and wait and talk to you, or he might run. And it depends on the severity of what's going on. Like if it wasn't, so vandalism, generally speaking, is something that you find you don't arrest someone on. So he'll probably just stand still. And in the progress status on the right side of the screen, it'll give you an idea of where you're at and what sort of force is necessary and allowed to be used. So you're not really allowed to go shooting people that just stand there after you catch them vandalizing or graffitiing a wall. In fact, you're not even actually allowed to restrain that dude at that point. But say you came across a drug deal and one of the dudes gives himself up immediately, puts his hands up in the air. Then you arrest him and read him his rights. And all these little bits of admin that you get right go into the XP cash out when you finally arrest and, cuff the dude to be booked. And if you actually accuse people of the wrong crime, that counts as poor behavior. I can't remember what it's called. Unprofessionalism, something like that. So if you tried to arrest said graffiti artist, you'll probably get in trouble for that. So, okay, let's take Mr. Graffiti example. You stop him, he stops. You prompt him for ID. I'm not going to get into the specific rights of whether you can or can't do that in real life. We're just going to stick with the game and the Hollywood version of all that. But you check his ID, and you run it back to dispatch, and occasionally they'll have an outstanding warrant, it might be burglary or manslaughter or something like that, so you got to keep that in mind. Generally, you'll search the person. There's no really good reason not to. If they'd been in like a gunfight or something and they dropped their gun, that comes up in the search as a dropped weapon. And then, let's say it was a traffic stop or something vehicle related, you can usually breathalyze them. I got unnecessarily or inappropriate breathalyzer as a penalty once, so I don't really know what the system is there, what means that you shouldn't breathalyze them. Generally speaking, you should just do it in general, but yeah, apparently there's a situation where it's wrong. I don't know. And you can pop the trunk and search the trunk of a vehicle as well, so there's a bit to do. So you go through those motions, and then you select on your little radial. Now, I was using thumbsticks, but mouse and keyboard work okay, but you still have camera limits and that sort of stuff. It really wants to be used for thumbsticks. But then you essentially set the charges. There'll be 3 categories. One is possession, one is on foot, and one is vehicle. And you go into these sub-menus and, I don't know, maybe you search the dude and you found counterfeit goods or an illegal weapon. Those are charges that you can stick to the rap sheet. Mr. Vandal that stopped, will basically just write him up for graffiti, which isn't an arrestable offence. It should give you an idea. And then you'll just give him a fine and go on your way. However, in the course of all of that, maybe when you go to grab his ID, he resists, he starts punching on with you, or he runs. The point is that within this system, whatever governs the AI's behavior, they can do all of these things. You have this with like hit and runs. Someone might get clipped by a car and the dude immediately stops to get out to fix it at the good Samaritan level. Other times they'll just run off, they'll just keep driving and then start a police chase. So there's all different things that can go on and go wrong. And then, that goes into crimes that will stick. Evading arrest, speeding in that vehicle case, assault, potentially depending on if, the graffiti artist decided to grapple with you or fight you or something like that. So it does become one of those things where within the scope of the officer's requirements, you do become competent in the knowledge of what to charge and not. Like if I tried to put manslaughter against that graffiti artist, it'll immediately go a big red X. There's no backsies, by the way. And then when I do fine him at the end or whatever, I will be penalized in the balance sheet for inappropriately sticking a crime to him. And so from that, a triage emerges. Maybe while I'm still checking the ID of this vandal, someone drives past and runs over 3 people and keeps going. Like, there is incentive to leave that vandal or finish that up as quick as possible and chase the other crime, if only because when you finally do arrest them and you put 5 major things on their rap sheet, you're going to get a shitload of XP. Now, through the course of all this, you've got your partner, and he sort of does stuff as well, albeit at a slower rate. Maybe there's 2 suspects and you're shaking one down doing your thing. He'll cuff and sort out the other guy, which arguably is XP that you won't get. That's part of one of the cool systems. You can delegate paperwork to him, so he will just shortcut and do everything for you, but at a penalty. Well, not a penalty, but a reduced gain. Same as when you finally do cuff them, you can escort them back to your police station on your own and take them to the front desk and book them in as well. And you'll get like 250 XP for that. Or you can call a car with dispatch and they will come and just pick him up and you'll only get 50 XP. So there's a thing to be said about if you do the job as thoroughly as possible, you're going to get the most XP possible, which then goes into end of shift calculations. You get to pick upgrades, etc. You unlock more weapons, more squad cars, that sort of thing. So you want to do the job right, and the systems there support encouraging that. Police chases are like the best. They're my favorite. And essentially, how to put this? So you'll be chasing a vehicle, and depending on what's going on, you're probably not allowed to ram them. There are some rare cases where it turns into, guns hanging out the side, shooting each other. But this depends on them. It's not very often, outside of story or gang-related incidents, that they will actually fire on you. It's probably just some drunk Karen driving from the police. So you pursue them and you use appropriate force as per the current escalation. And you have kind of like an action mana bar at the top that you fill up. And the closer you are in the pursuit, the more it will fill up. And then once it fills the bar, the little tic-tac mana action point, whatever you want to call it, you've got it until you spend it. And you can upgrade it. I think my bar at the end was up to 4 segments, and you can pull up a radial to call police support. Most of the things cost 2. Like you can call foot patrolmen with 1. That's kind of situational, at least in a car chase. Maybe when you're in a helicopter, because if you keep your spotlight on dudes, that counts as charging the bar. You then can call foot troopers in to chase down a suspect on foot. But generally you'll want to save 2 to get another patrol car in, but you'll unlock all sorts of cool things. Roadblocks, SWAT vehicles, bloody the thing that punctures tires across the road. And yeah, you end up in these really fun police chases, smashing through everything, essentially reenacting being a Blues Brothers cop, smashing into other AI cop cars, part of the pursuit the longer it goes on. You get in each other's way, and again, I'm grinning because it's kind of fun in a chaotic way. And you can scream on the bullhorn, and generally speaking, all criminals will have a health bar or a vehicle health bar and a morale meter. And, if you drop the health bar down, either they'll be dead because you shot them in a gunfight, or their vehicle's going to explode and they'll jump out. Or if the morale bar hits 0, they will jump out and surrender. So some of the police chases are really fun, but definitely incredibly chaotic because you do have your hands tied a little bit. The key to a police chase is just hugging up to the other car, which is easier said than done, as opposed to like shooting them or ramming them, which you do in 90% of other games. And the sort of narrative through the core of the game is that you're taking down these 2 gangs and you're working your way up their food chain. Essentially, all it really is this throttled set piece boss scenario where you fill it up by getting evidence through the course of the game and cashing it at the evidence desk at the end of your shift. Say you shake someone down from a gunfight, you take the gun into evidence. And sometimes it'll be generic evidence and sometimes it'll be named gang evidence. Anyway, you fill up the gang bar to 10 or whatever, it'll unlock the first lieutenant in the gang. You'll do a mini mission instead of a shift where it ends into a set piece drug bust, fighting all the baddies and then chasing him down. You'll arrest the lieutenant. They will, rat out their captain, and then you do the same thing again. So you do that 3 or 4 times, going up until you crack the entire gang, and you do that for 2 gangs. So that's sort of a mini boss mechanic in the background going on. There's also some police detectives that recognize your potential and cut you in on some of the stuff. And it gets a little bit more like Batman, being a cop in Batman City, sort of serial killers stuffing money down people's throat and investigating the crime scene. It's actually very light. And mentioning the Batman thing as well, there's collectibles that a dude stole all these art pieces from the art museum and spattered them around. It's very gamey. I didn't engage with it very much, but it's got kind of Riddler vibes as well. Like, if they had their own version of Batman rock up in this game, he'd be right at home. But look, that pretty much covers all of the game from start to finish. You do your shifts, you embrace the chaos, but then you observe protocol and clean up the arrests at the end, fill your car up with criminals, take them back to the precinct, go back out on patrol, rinse, repeat for about a dozen hours. And it's excellent. I really, really enjoyed it a lot. Anyway, just chucking at the end, for those curious, those who've stuck around for after the review, yeah, look, I gave it 99%. What that means, if you're not across it, and I'm going to do quarterly update reviews, so I'm obviously behind on the first quarterly, but the idea is to review about 2 games a week, okay? 100 games a year. I've done the math. It all works out at roughly 20 hours per game at a rate of about 6 hours per day. And honestly, it was put to me, you should be doing what you want, Scarlett. And this is what I want to do. If I had $1 billion and I didn't have to work, this is what I'd want to do. I'd want to play 2 games a week. There's usually pretty much 2 high-profile games a week, by the way, if you ever check releases on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And I figure I might as well just do this on the channel. So it's a ranking, right? One game's going to have 1%, one game's going to have 100%. And I'm only going to play games that I want to play, really. So what this means is there's probably going to be games that get 30% that are perfectly good. It might be your favorite game of the year. Me giving it 30% is not saying that it's bad. It's just a relative, usable ranking scale to help you as a consumer figure it out. I think people want to have their cake and eat it too. On one hand, they will say the IGN 7 out of 10 system is useless because if you give everything 7 out of 10, what does that even tell you? I mean, do they even give 1s out of 10? What would be a 1 or 2 out of 10 on the current review scale used by every site? I don't know, neither do you. So it's a broken system that only uses half the numbers. And at least with my system, it's gonna rock your Overton window a little bit and shuffle up the status quo by giving 40% to a good game. But all that really tells you is there are 60 other games that I would recommend you play before you play game 61 at the 40%. I hope this clarifies a little bit. At the end of the day, it's about serving you with a recommendation list. And it's not about playing favorites or fanboys or sucking up to companies because at the end of the day, fuck the game companies. They've proven time and time again that they're not necessarily on your team. Anyway, look, that's my reviews. If you have any questions or anything like that, chuck a comment. There's a Discord link in the description. Come in there, pick my brain about this sort of stuff because, yeah, it's weird, it's different, but I actually think it's better, dare I say, than the stupid publisher-centric, playing it safe review system that permeates the space now. Anyway, I don't need to waffle. Precinct's awesome. You should check it out. Might just leave it there for the time being and I'll catch you guys on the next one.